Hi, come on back into my kitchen and let's do another Bible study. In last week's Bible study, we talked about Abigail, who was married to a wicked man. And in this study, we learned that he was an alcoholic. We talked a little bit about alcohol, and I mentioned that my father had had a battle with that when he was a young man, and that God had delivered him. And I was thinking about how it affects a life or how it begins. I wanted to read just a short snippet from one of the books that I've written. It's about my mom and dad, Kid and Spitfire Doll. But I believe this is how his problem started with alcohol. He had been in a wreck and his hip had been broken. And because of the doctor that operated on him was drunk at the time, and they did some bad treatments, and because of that, one of his legs was 3 inches shorter than the other, and he walked with a limp. And in fact, later he learned that his hip socket had deteriorated, and there was nothing there to hold. When he walked, like the hip socket does this, but when he walked, the socket was gone, and his bone stuck in the flesh, which was excruciatingly painful. Well, during this time, this is what happened. Yates struggled with the limp. He practiced walking, but no matter how hard he tried, his body went up and down, side to side with each step. Whenever he was in a crowd and heard a person snicker, he thought they laughed at him and his crooked walk. Every now and then he heard someone whisper the word cripple. He knew they were talking about him behind his back. Embarrassment, sadness, and irritation rotated in his emotions. Gone was his even temperament. He fought to regain control of these feelings, but believed his life was ruined. Nightmares of the fateful accident that left him lame tormented his sleep. Anger that began in the hospital toward Pa grew into a monster. He tried to choke it back, swallowed it, and hide it behind his smile. It grew harder to gulp down and nearly impossible to smile. During the long months that Yates was in the hospital, he didn't see much of Gilbert. Gilbert was his brother. He visited a few times and at first seemed like himself, but later Gilbert acted different, distant. The brothers had always been close, and Yates wondered what was wrong. One day after Yates went home with Ma and Pa, Gilbert came by and went straight to the backyard. Yates followed and walked up behind him as Gilbert hid something in his jacket pocket. "What's that?" Gilbert walked away. "None of your business." Yates hobbled after him, grabbed his arm, and swung him around. "Don't you ignore me," Yates said through clenched teeth. He reached in Gilbert's coat and drew out a bottle. "Where'd you get this?" "I said it's none of your business." The brothers stood glaring at each other for what seemed like eternity. Yates broke the stare by jerking the lid off the bottle. He looked at the amber liquid, swished it around inside, and took a long swig. When he pulled the bottle away from his lips, he coughed and spewed half of it on the ground. "That stuff tastes awful." "It gets better after a while," Gilbert said. As the booze hit Yates' stomach, he felt warmth flow through his body. He turned the bottle up again, and this time he swallowed the whole gulp. In a few minutes, his leg didn't seem so important. He learned that Gilbert always had a pint stashed. If Yates felt insecure, he could depend on Gilbert for a shot. And that was the beginning of his addiction to alcohol. Satan is very deceptive, and he tries to get to us any way that he can. I've known many people who got addicted to drugs through pain of some sort, and through prescription medication for pain, they became addicted. But the good news is, and the reason I'm doing these Bible studies is to let you know if your husband is having that problem, or maybe you have that problem, God can help you and God can deliver you, because Jesus has already paid the price for your deliverance, so you don't have to suffer and continue in that situation. Today we're going to talk about Michal. She's the next Bible stud, wives of the Bible character. And Michal lived with embarrassment. She loved David, and she became David's wife. And I thought I would just read a little bit of her background from this little book, Wives of the Bible. She liked to look out palace windows, or it seems like 2 different times she looked out the window and saw 2 different scenes. In the first scene, I'll just tell you the first scene. In the first scene, she saw a man come walking carrying a head. That's right, a head. And when her brother came in and told her, when Jonathan, her brother, came in and told her that David had killed the giant that was threatening all the army of Israel, and David was just a young man, and that he cut off his head, that he killed the giant, he slung his slingshot around and hit the mark, hit the giant in the forehead. It knocked him down. David ran and cut off the giant's head. Then he took the head and brought it into Jerusalem. Well, when she looked out the window and saw that, it may have grossed her out a little bit, but she wasn't embarrassed about what she saw then. But the thing that she was embarrassed about was years later. And I'll just read a little bit of this. She fell in love with David. He started to come to the palace, and she fell in love with him. And Saul had been trying to kill David. Her father had evil spirits that would work on him and make him jealous of David. He knew David would be the next king. He knew that God had rejected him, and he became very jealous of David and wanted to kill him. But David had this talent of playing the harp, and when he played his harp, the king, the evil spirits quieted or left Saul, and he returned to his right mind. That worked for a while, and then after a while, it's like it didn't work anymore. And one day when David was playing his harp for the king to soothe him, the king threw his javelin and tried to kill David. He missed, because God intended for David to be the next king of Israel. David was gone from home a lot during this time because Saul was looking for him, and he had to sneak out. And in fact, Michal helped him sneak out. And there's the window again. She helped him sneak out the window to get away when her father had sent soldiers to take him from his bed and take him so that Saul could kill him. And while David was gone, her father gave her to another man, a man named Saul. And it seemed that he loved her deeply, but David was so upset when he came back from battle. He went for her and brought her back. Now she's resentful, and she's not liking David a lot. And she's looking out the window one day. It was the first window where she had seen David the first time, the day that he brought the head of Goliath. But today there was a parade. She watched as the procession passed. 4 men carried the golden ark of God on their shoulders. It hung from poles that went through 4 loops attached to each corner. The sun caught the gold, and the rays were blinding to Michal. When her eyes cleared so that she could see again, she saw the same person who had carried the head of Goliath. But the king, he was now king of Israel. He was not acting as a king. He was leaping and twirling and dancing in the street. "Has David gone mad?" she asked. Then she noticed his clothes. What in the world was he wearing? His kingly robe was gone, and in its place he wore the priest's garment. "How embarrassing," she said. "He might just as well be naked in the streets. And look at the women singing and dancing with him." Her old jealous feelings of the days when she first heard the women sing of his feats returned. when she knew that they thought more of David than they did of her father, Saul. She watched as David offered sacrifices to God. What's he doing now? She saw him give parts of the food sacrifices to the women as well as the men. That is uncalled for, she said. I despise him. When the celebration was over, David came to the palace to bless his house. Michal went out to meet him. How glorious the king looked today, she said in disgust. He exposed himself to the girls along the street like a common pervert. That's in 2 Samuel 6:20. David replied, I was dancing before the Lord who chose me above your father and his family, and who appointed me as leader of Israel, the people of the Lord. I'm willing to act like a fool in order to show my joy in the Lord. Yes, I am willing to look even more foolish than this, but I will be respected by the girls of whom you spoke. That's a sad story because Michal, in verse 23, it sounds like she was punished by God for speaking as she did and making fun and being embarrassed about David when he was worshiping God, when he twirled and danced in the streets. The Bible says he did it with all of his might, but he did it to honor the God of Israel, who had given them great and glorious victories, and they were bringing the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem where it belonged. Now, one of the things that we can learn from Michal is that I can lose love for my husband if I don't nurture it. She lost love for her husband. She said that she despised him. That's what the Bible says. And another thing I can learn from her is instead of watching others, I need to stay busy with my own responsibilities. See, she was looking out the window. Instead of joining in the celebration and the worship of God and the mighty things that God had done for Israel, she was just standing there observing and looking on. Embarrassment stems from pride and jealousy. So if you are embarrassed about people who worship God in a different manner from you, check and see if you have too much pride. Or maybe you're jealous. Jealousy will cause angry words and dissension in my home. If I continue, I battled jealousy for years, and I'm so thankful that one day I received deliverance for that spirit of jealousy, and it is a spirit, and it had tormented me for a long time. And in another book, I tell all about how I've received my deliverance. I can learn from Michal that there are consequences if I don't respect my husband. I can also learn, instead of allowing myself to become bitter and hateful, I need to be thankful for the position I hold in my home. See, Michal was the queen. I mean, she was the wife of the king of Israel, and she didn't respect that position. She was still mad that her daddy had been put out, and now her husband was in his place. And you can't live with bitterness from the past. So if you have bitterness from things that happened in the past, give them to the Lord today. Just pray and ask Him to help you to overcome. Some of the spiritual gems that I learned from this lesson was that Michal was the daughter of the first king of Israel and the wife of the second king of Israel. Many privileges and blessings came with her position. She was embarrassed by the king's display of joy and criticized him. And then today, how I bring it home to today, we are the daughter of the King of Heaven and will be the bride of the King of Kings. Everything the King has is ours, all the privileges and riches. Let's not grumble and find fault with the King when he does a new thing that we don't understand. Michal didn't understand why he worshiped God in the streets, in this priestly robe instead of his kingly robe, why he was dancing and twirling. She didn't get it. And some people don't understand when we worship God, and they call us names. But we still are in love with the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and we still want to worship Him. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. And remember, next Tuesday on our Turnaround Tuesday, we'll study another wife of the Bible. We'll study Bathsheba, and we'll find out why she lived with guilt See you then. Bye.